Hello there and welcome. This is Out Motorsports. My name is Jake and this is not the new Ford Bronco. Yes, the Ford Bronco is announced, it is coming, it is being delivered to customers later this year, but this is not the Bronco. This is another part of Ford's revitalized 2021 Bronco family. This is the 2021 Ford Bronco Sport. Now this is confusing, there's a lot of swirl on the internet and in person. It can be kind of tough to keep things straight if you're not the biggest enthusiast of Ford or of the Bronco lineup. So let's break down what this thing actually is. Like I said, Ford has reintroduced the Bronco for the 2021 model year. We haven't seen a Bronco since the mid-1990s at this point. And back then, Ford had the big Bronco, which was kind of F-150-ish sized but shorter. And then they also had the Bronco 2, which was more or less a Ranger that they had shortened. Now, for the 2021 model year, Ford announced the Bronco is back, and they are doing the big Bronco, which is going to be based on our current Ford Ranger pickup truck. Now, they decided to also bring back a smaller Bronco, which is this one. This is the Bronco Sport. And the Bronco Sport is a unibody crossover that is allegedly very capable off-road if you buy the right one. The one I'm standing in front of is the Bronco Sport Outer Banks trim, which is the highest trim level that's more street-focused versus off-road focused. And we'll talk about the differences between the two in just a minute. Now, lest you think this is just a Ford Escape in heels, it isn't. The platform is the same between the two models, but the wheelbase and all the other dimensions are different between the two. Now, Ford will tell you that the Bronco Sport is going to be more off-road capable than the Escape in its lineup. Even though they're similarly sized, the Bronco Sport offers more capability. And that comes down to a different suspension. Like I said, the wheelbase is different, the dimensions are different, and it also comes down to some of the drive modes. Now, the most aggressive off-road capable version of the Bronco Sport is called the Badlands trim. That's not this one. This is the Bronco Sport Outer Banks edition, which is more or less the highest street-focused trim level of the Bronco Sport. If you want all the off-road gear, which we'll talk about in a second, you'll want the Badlands trim. Now, unless you get the Badlands trim, every Bronco Sport that you're looking at will come with the 1.5-liter EcoBoost 3-cylinder in Ford's engine family. And in this instance of 1.5 liter, it makes 181 horsepower and 190 pound-feet of torque. Now that seems good enough, but the Bronco Sport in 1.5 liter iteration weighs a little over 3,400 pounds, and that's before you put people and things in it. So that brings the power to weight ratio of the Bronco Sport to about 19.1 pounds per horsepower. That means every horsepower that this Turbo 3 is making has to move over 19 pounds of weight before you sit down in it. So we'll get into how it drives, but this is certainly not the quickest thing on the road. It's one of the slower cars we've reviewed all of 2021 so far. And if you're one of those people who has a need for speed, you may want to look into the Badlands. It's a little heavier, but it makes substantially more power and torque. Every Bronco Sport puts power to the wheels with a standard 8-speed automatic transmission and all-wheel drive. Now, the all-wheel drive setup in the Bronco Sport Outer Banks, like this one, as well as the lower trims under the Outer Banks, is different from that of the one in the Badlands, but they are both considered all-wheel drive. They do not have a 2-speed transfer case to change your gearing. Ford's big claim to fame with the Bronco Sport is the drive modes. They call them GOAT, which is a throwback to the Broncos of the 60s. It was a marketing campaign that stood for Goes Over Any Terrain. And in this case, the Bronco Sport has about 5 different drive modes you can pick from: the typical Sport, Normal, Eco, and then there's a few for off-road sort of scenarios. The other thing that is different with this Bronco Sport compared to the Escape is the suspension, and Ford calls it HOS. There's a lot of kind of cheesy marketing speak here, and HOS, if I can get this right, stands for High Performance Off-Road Stability Suspension. What it means is the suspension is different from anything else in their crossover lineup, and it is unique to the Bronco Sport. Now, before we get into how this particular Bronco Sport Outer Banks rides and drives, let's talk about that Badlands edition that I mentioned earlier. Like I said, the Badlands is going to be the most off-road capable version of the Bronco Sport. If you want even more capability than that, you'll want to go to the Big Boy Bronco, which, like I said, is different from this and is not out yet. But the Bronco Sport Badlands is going to be faster and more capable, and here is why. First of all, Ford takes away the 1.5 liter Turbo 3 and they replace it with their 2 liter EcoBoost Turbo 4. That gets you 250 horsepower and 277 pound-feet of torque. That's a pretty big increase. Now, all the extra hardware that you get on the Badlands edition does add another 240 pounds to the overall curb weight of the Bronco Sport, but you've still got a lot more power and torque to just generally make up for all of that. So if you're one of those people that's a fan of speed and punchy torque, you're probably going to want the Badlands. Now, beyond the engine difference of the Badlands, another notable feature is that Ford gives you paddle shifters on the steering wheel to control that 8-speed automatic transmission. If you don't have a Badlands, the only option you have to control the transmission is to change between drive and low. That's it. You also get a few more off-road drive modes, those GOAT modes. Ford adds a few more of those that are designed and calibrated for a little more intense off-roading. Now, protecting everything underneath when you are off-roading in just the Badlands, not the Outer Banks, is a set of skid plates. Ford has gone that extra mile, again, just with the Badlands version of the Bronco Sport. The other thing they've done with the Bronco Sport Badlands is they've increased the ride height and how much standing water it can go through. This Bronco Sport and all of the other non-Badlands Bronco Sports has 7.9 inches of ground clearance, which is pretty good. However, the Badlands rides almost a full inch taller at 8.8 inches of ground clearance. The bigger thing, if you're off-roading somewhat seriously and you deal with a lot of water crossings, is how much water, how much standing water a Bronco Sport can go through. This one can go through a little more than 17 inches of standing water, which is pretty good for what it is. However, again, if you want the most off-road capability, the Bronco Sport Badlands can go through 23.6 inches of standing water. That is really, really neat. Now, one other really important piece of the Bronco Sport Badlands in particular is what Ford calls the rear drive unit. If you think of a differential, it's the rear differential for the all-wheel drive system. Now, like I said, every Bronco Sport is all-wheel drive. That is the only way they come. However, if you choose to get the Badlands, you will get an upgraded rear drive unit, and that will give you the ability to send all of the engine's power, Ford claims, to one of the rear wheels. It's a twin clutch unit, and it's a little better suited for heavier duty off-roading needs versus this one, which is more meant for mostly on-street or light off-roading. The other couple items that make the Badlands different from the rest of the Bronco Sport lineup include a different set of tires. You get a set of all-terrains on the Badlands. In this case, this Outer Banks trim has some Michelin highway tires on it, and with the Badlands, you'll get a set of recovery hooks around the car. So all of these are meant to go off-road in some capacity. However, like I said, the Badlands is not only going to be the fastest, but it will be the most off-road capable, and it's not just little differences. It is real hardware differences between the two models of Bronco Sport. So the Outer Banks is great if you're looking to cruise around mostly on the street and do a little bit of light off-roading, but if you're looking to do more involved off-roading, you will want to check out the Badlands instead. Now, with all that said, let's talk about how this Bronco Sport Outer Banks is to drive with that 1.5 liter turbo 3-cylinder. All right, so driving the 2021 Bronco Sport with that 1.5 liter, I'm gonna just go ahead and floor it here. That is not the most inspiring acceleration. Like I said, it's 19 point something pounds per horsepower, which in 2021 is fairly slow, all things considered. Is it unsafe? Not by any means. Will it get up on the highway and do 80, 85 miles an hour? Absolutely. Is it going to be the fastest thing in the world down an on-ramp? And will you be the most inspired as you pull out to pass someone on the highway? No and no. It will be fine, but it will not be the quickest thing in the world. And if you like speed, like I mentioned, you'll probably want that 2 liter. The transmission behavior, I think, is fine, although it seems to shift fairly slowly in this car. I don't know if it would behave any differently with the 2 liter, and like I said, you don't get paddles on the 1.5 versions of the Bronco Sport, so it's kind of left to its own devices here. Suspension-wise, like I said, the suspension is different from the Escape on which this is based, and I think it's okay, although it is somewhat firm, but it does a pretty good job as far as general ride comfort, and through a twisty bit, you know, it's not meant to be a sports car in the least. However, it does an okay job. Again, putting my foot down here to merge, it's fine, it works, it's not the slowest thing in the world, and to be honest, most drivers are painfully slow in the first place, so this will be more than adequate to zip around some people. But if you're kind of a speed demon, you will absolutely want the 2-liter in the Badlands. As far as how the rest of this drives in particular, I think steering is fine. It's a little bit light at parking lot speeds, but once you're on the move, it firms up okay. And I think it does give you decent road feel. Like I said, I didn't take this off-road. I really didn't have any time this week that I've had with the Bronco Sport to get this one in particular off-road. So can't really tell you how it feels for positioning your wheels when you're on a trail, but I think it's accurate enough. You only have a rear-facing camera, speaking of positioning your wheels, so if you're looking for a 360-degree camera view, you're not going to get it on the Bronco Sport, at least not in this Outer Banks trim. And once you're at speed here and driving around town, suspension comfort, ride comfort is always a concern. I do think this does fairly well with both. It is obviously not going to be the most plush thing in the world because it is just not a very luxury-oriented vehicle. It's very kind of rough and tumble, but it is pretty refined. It's pretty good on the highway. The biggest complaint I have about the ride, the overall experience beyond just the lack of horsepower, is just the road noise. It's just evident by the fact that this is kind of a boxier shape, and it's it's a lower-priced vehicle in Ford's lineup. But for most buyers, I think they're going to find it completely adequate. And I think it's going to be found to be fairly comfortable. The seats in here are fairly comfortable, although I share a similar frustration with these seats as I do with the Mustang Mach-E, and that is when you go to tilt the seat, you can only tilt the rear of the seat, and as you tilt it, it moves forward and up at the same time. So there's plenty of room in here to get a comfortable seating position. The steering wheel also tilts and telescopes, but it's just kind of odd the first time you sit down in here and try to get a good seating position, how everything moves or doesn't move. The front of the seat does not tilt up and down. The other interesting thing I noticed with the Bronco Sport is that it is kind of tight in here in some ways. It's not terrible, and there's this stepped kind of safari roof going on in the back, so there's actually good rear seat headroom for tall passengers. I can sit behind myself and be comfortable from a headroom perspective, and I'm over 6 feet tall. However, you do really lose some rear seat leg room. That is where this car is the tightest, and I think if you're looking to transport people in the back seat on the regular, you might find it kind of small. If you're just going to be driving yourself and a front seat passenger most of the time, you'll probably feel fine. All right, and that is it for this review of the 2021 Ford Bronco Sport Outer Banks. Thank you so much for coming along. As always, if you like what we're up to, please take a second and subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like. Make sure to turn on that notification bell because we've got a lot of fun stuff coming with new cars, new trucks, old trucks, motorsports. We're here for all of it. As always, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Out Motorsports. And if you're looking to connect with like-minded LGBT automotive enthusiasts, motorsports competitors, and a bunch of our friends, head on over to outmotorsports.com. We've got a whole community over there, and we would love to meet you. Until next time, please stay safe, be well. We'll see you again soon.